Hello and welcome along. Here I'm going to be talking about moving objects from one tenant to another, so from one Entra ID to another Entra ID, using the MigrationWiz tool to perform all of those tasks. Now, using this Active Directory migration tool, we can actually take objects from any of the source and any of the targets in that little matrix. So if you want to go from local ID to local ID, you can. Entra ID to Entra ID, obviously you can do that as well, but you can also go from local Active Directory into Entra and vice versa as well. So you've got a lot of flexibility on what you can move around with this tool. So let's jump in with our normal MigrationWiz account and set up a project to perform this action. I'm going to do everything in real time so you can see everything on the source tenant and on the target tenant. I do want to make a point here that we are very, very careful with our matching criteria, because there obviously is a chance that we can start bulldozing accounts in the target ID if we're not careful. So please make sure we pay close attention to that, and also the simulations that we can do and looking at the log files, so we can make absolutely sure that what we're doing is going to be correct for our project. So let's sign in now and kick off that project creation. So we're going to go here and hit Create Project and choose the Active Directory Migration Project. And we've got our normal project name and customer, but I want to show you this one here, the source agent type. We can go from AD and Entra, which we'll choose Entra here, and we'll choose Entra down here. Now, this is important because we actually still have, like a normal AD project, even though we're going Entra to Entra, we still use the source and target agent on relevant DCs. Now, if you're not doing a DC migration, no problem. You can put them onto any workstation. You can do what you need to do. But the source agent and the target agent are quite important for this whole project to work. So then I'll put in the project name and the customer here, and I will hit next step. Now this is where it talks about the downloading of the source agent and the target agent, but also it talks about the endpoint. Now this is obviously important because it's going to be an Entra endpoint. We do have to create that application registration and also give it that service account we would use to perform that work as well. So if we hit new here for a new endpoint, you can see you get the normal screen that you'd be used to in terms of the MigrationWiz project setup, but we put in a name of the endpoint and we put in the admin and password for the Entra source, like so, and just hit add there, at which point we'll be talking about the different client ID and the directory ID and the client secret for what we set up in the application registration. So let's go and do that now. So inside the Cozy Mouse tenant, which is our source, we're going to go across to Entra and we'll go into our, you can see the home here, we're going into the application registration here, and across to all applications, we're going to create a new one. So hit new, and we'll call this one MigrationWiz Entra Demo, and hit register. Close that out, and of course we get our normal client ID and directory ID. Now we're going to copy those into the project, but we're going to do the client secret first and have all that information in, and then we'll set up those API permissions. However, first we do need to go to authentication and turn on the public flow, hit save there, and we're going to go to certificates and secrets. We'll create a new client secret here, and we'll just call this one MigrationWiz add. You can see it comes up here. Now remember to copy that out now, because that entry will disappear. Obviously it stays in place, but you can't see that value anymore. So we're going to just scoot across to the project now, and we'll go ahead and paste it in the client secret like so. Then coming back to this screen, we'll go to the overview here, we'll grab the application or the client ID and paste that in there, and likewise with the directory and tenant ID, which we'll grab accordingly, and you can see we're pasting it in here. Now let's go back to our other screen though, because we do need to give it some rights as well. So we need the API permissions, and we'll add permissions in here. Now they are going to be graph, and they're going to be application permissions, and the ones I'm going to need, if we do a search for user, you can see we need to do user read all, we will also need in there 2 for groups as well. So we're going to need group read all, and we will need group member read all. Now remembering that we're in the source tenant right now, which is why we're choosing the read instead of the write. We don't need to write anything in the source, so it's all just going to be read. So we'll add those permissions in there, and we then need to do the granting of the admin consent as well, which we'll do like so. Now the API key as well, we'll copy that out. I'm going to put that into Notepad just to keep that for a bit later on. You'll obviously require that when we're setting up the source agent, and also you can hit the download source agent. I'm going to put those onto those little machines I have, the DCs that I have set up ready. As I said before, you can put it on a normal workstation if you want to. If you don't have a DC associated with the domain, it can live basically anywhere you need it to. As long as it's running on a machine, then you are good to go. So the next one, hit next step, and we get to do the same thing with the target. Now this is going to be exactly the same, except for a couple of things, which is obviously having the write access for the API permissions, not just the read access. So I'm going to create the endpoint now, and I'm just going to pause at the point where I choose those different writes that we did in the source account. So inside here we'll say add permission, and it will be graph again, application permissions, and this time we'll hit user dot, and you can see we're going to need the read write all there. And again, if I hit group, you'll find group, we will need read write all and group member. Read write all. There we go. Add those in, grant the admin consent as we did before, and we are good to go. Now let me just drop that away because I've already put these items in here for us to save a bit of time as well. So there's our account, our application ID, client secret, and we are good to go. But the destination has an additional setting here. We need to set the region about where we are. We'll say West Coast there, and also what we want to put in, and we'll call it migrationfrog.com, as you can see there, and hit save, go to summary. And that will save everything for us, and you can see it's now hitting the save project is the next step, and it'll take us into what we would normally expect as an Active Directory migration or a standard MigrationWiz project, because we would need to have obviously the source identities populated so we can then do something with them. So let's now set up the source and target agent. So that will be on the local machines, so we can get that scan done and bring in these objects. So here we are on the Cozy Mouse DC, and we've got the source agent installer ready to go. Let's just run that one up, and we can see it is just really just a next finish as we install it. Nothing special there, but I wanted you to see what happens there. But I will do the launch of the agent here as well now. So we'll hit finish on that, and that's where we get to do the configuration and have it connect and pick up those items. Now, because this is the first time we've run it, you'll find that when we put it in, it's not going to remember, obviously, the credentials and the details of the API key. So we'll put that in. But when you run it subsequent times, you don't have to do this particular setup again. So we'll just put in our username and password. Now, this is the username and password from MigrationWiz itself. This is nothing to do with your source or target locations. This is your MigrationWiz console ID. So you can see I've put that in, and we hit next. And that will take us into the request for the API key and the project. Now this is the key that you got from the setup inside the MigrationWiz console. So I'll put that in along with the project name as well, which we put in, hit next, and that will then validate that and give us our next screen. Now this is where we get to choose whether we want to bring in users and or groups. I'm going to bring in users and groups for this one, just so you can see how that's laid out there. I can hit the auto sync so that if I had changes being made in the users or additional users and groups, they would then automatically show up on that time schedule. But also if you've got things changing in the source, you want to either turn that on or run multiple passes. So that'll be important when we start talking about the matching criteria a little later on. You may want to do that, but essentially right now we just hit the users and groups. We hit start scan and transmit, and that will then bring in those objects. You can see 96 due to come in and successfully sent 96, which is very good. So let's jump over to the console and let's have a look at those 96 objects it's found. So here I'll hit refresh, and then there we go. There's our groups sitting there at the top there, but these are all our other IDs. You can see there's groups intermingled depending on the names of them, but really you can see that there's our objects from the Entra ID on the source. Now let's jump over to the target. And you can see here, I'm going to be doing the target agent install here on this other domain controller. And as I say, it could be on a different workstation. It doesn't matter where it lives as long as it can connect to the net and perform these tasks. So let's do this. Hit finish there and drop that one down so we can see, and hit accept here. Now this is a very, very similar setup that we just had. So I'm going to put in the username and password, obviously the same as what we had on the source agent, which is this here. We'll hit next, and that will go and check those and log us in. And then we want the same API key that we used in the source, the one for the project, and also the project name. So let's put those in as well. Like so, hit next, it'll validate those, and then it will jump into the write screen. Now remember, this is going to write anything that you tell it to from the console. It will do the check, as you can see, every 300 seconds. So every 5 minutes, it's going to go and check for things to do. If you want to make that a bit longer, you certainly can. 300 seconds is going to be your minimum that you can have, but you can do the trigger manual heartbeat there, so you can force it to do things immediately if you want to. Now you can see with both of those agents set up, they've gone green on here. The source and the target have both gone green, so it knows it's connected. So we are ready to actually do a migration now. Now I'm going to pick one first of all, which is just going to be just kicking one user off that I know doesn't exist in the target, just so that we can see what that does when we just go in with the standard matching criteria and just let it go ahead and create an object. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how it does the matching criteria, so we can have a bit more control and a bit more of a granular level about how these objects are being written. So what I'm going to do to kick one user off, we're going to take this chap down here, which will be Martin Brundle here. Now if we look at his object, if we click on it, you'll see what he has, which is a pretty basic entry. There's nothing much to it there, but you can see that's the Cozy Mouse account that he has, and the user and surname. Now let's go in here and we will click on him here and write to target, yes please. And of course we start migration, and it tells us it's going to have one. It's just making sure we understand what's really happening here, and we'll hit OK. And you can see from our status, if we go down, it does sort, as you can see on there, awaiting first sync. Where is Martin gone? There he is here. Okay, so you can see here in the status, awaiting write to target. So you know that one's about to be done. So we go across to the DC that's holding that agent, and let's see how many seconds it's got to go. And we trigger a manual one if we need to. So yes, we will. It's got 77 seconds to go. We'll say trigger manual heartbeat there, and it will then get the work that it needs to do. You can see it's found one AD object it wants to write. It's found the Martin Brundle here. It says write user object, okay. This one says write user object, which means it's created it straight up on the target environment. So let's go and have a look and see what that has done. Now, as I say, I'm doing this in real time, so you can see he doesn't exist here because I need to hit refresh. Once I do that, you should find there he is. And you can see it has taken on the prefix Martin Brundle. It has gone in as Migration Frog, which is our default one, and it's also the one that we set up in the project creation. So that's important that you have that right as well, because that will need to match what the default one is going to be. And you can see contact information. There's not really much information apart from obviously display name, first name, last name, but it has performed that creation. And so Martin now has an account inside the Migration Frog tenant. And of course I can license it or do whatever I need to do. Now that works really well because Martin Brundle didn't exist in the target tenant. It knew that, it just created him straight up, and everything was fine there. Let me show you the logs to show you exactly what it did in the creation of this object. Now I should tell you as well, while we've been sitting here, you'll notice that we've got a second entry here. Now this is because the timer went down again, and it got to the point, because it's on a continuous sync cycle, it's going to do that update. So if you had data coming in continuously for Martin, let's say you had some other objects, so items in there, let's say an address and the like, then it's still on that sync schedule. It's going to hit the timer here. It's going to go over the top and write those entries in. So it's you've got to be careful that if you don't want that to happen, go and turn off the sync in the console for Martin. Otherwise, it's going to continually keep updating that information with data from the source, which is a really nice feature to have if you want it to do that. So if I would have put an address in and other items items. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do that right now. Let's perform that and get that data up there and just let it see that syncing for Martin. Now it's created an object for Martin. It's very important to know that's now bound with the object ID. So if we were to go in and change something like his UPN or other information there, it's still bound to that object. So it will still keep updating it. But let's log into the Cozy Mouse tenant. Let's put some changes in Martin's account and just see that come through. So we're back inside Cozy Mouse. Let's find Martin, and we're going to go in and add some details in for him. It's being a bit slow there. That's about. There we are. Okay, we'll just connect that information. And everyone knows Martin. He is an awesome F1 commentator. We'll put in F1 here. We'll put address. We'll put in number 1. Short Street, London, that's where he is, and even put in a location for him. Let's put in the UK as well, just so we've got some information to bring over and sync. So we'll save those changes there. Good. Now what we will need to do is, if we don't have the source agent sitting on a timer, we're going to need to just do a quick scan again. So let's jump into that DC and kick that off. So in here, I'm just going to say start scan and transmit again. And it will then, there we are, there's our 96 objects retransmitted. Now if I jump back to the console, just hit a refresh there, and let's go find Martin again, just down the list here. There he is. Let's go and have a look at his object now. And you can see now it's picked up that additional information, which he has there. If we hit close, and let's go across to the other DC, the one with the target agent on it. And I don't want to wait again, so we'll just hit manual heartbeat. We should find it'll update him again. Now that's going to update him in the target tenant with that new information that we've put in there. So now target tenant, I'm just going to hit refresh just for good measure, find Martin again and have a look at his contact information. And you can see now it's got the details added in. So there you can see that's how things get updated. If they get updated on the source, it's a nice easy way to get them updated on the target. Now if I didn't want that to happen, what I'd be doing is I'd going into the MigrationWiz console in here, and I just go and tell it to stop. You can see that item that said previously continuous sync on has now gone away. We've got sync off. So we know that he's no longer being synced. Any changes that come through are not going to make it onto the target unless I turn that back on again. Now I'm going to jump into the log file. I want to show you where the log files are so you can see what has been happening here. So if I go into normal Explorer here, let's have a look on the C drive, program files, and BitTitan, target agent, and logs. And you can see there's the TX1 file, but it also converts them to plain text as well. So we go to plain text here, and let's have a look at this file. So there is a lot of information in here, so just be careful as you go through not to get too bamboozled by everything, but we're particularly looking for the items that talk about Martin. Now there's only one item in this one so far, so it's quite easy to go through and look. But what you're looking for here is, you can see it's actually doing a matching criteria. It is looking for the UPN, as you can see, the matching criteria, attribute name, user principal name there, and you can see it's found that the true value here is a cross of migration frog, and it will go through and decide whether it finds a match, what it needs to do with it, and obviously then perform that task. And I'm just looking through as I'm talking to you here, all these items here, but you can see it has decided it does need to create the source object, and you can see there's the GUID that it has, and you can see there's all the different tasks that it's doing as it goes through. So you can see down here, and off it goes. Now it's going to do the same thing when it needs to perform the secondary pass as well, that it needs to match it up. You can see there, from there, it is actually matching because it knows it's done that before. So of course you can see all these items, and it's done a few of those already, so this is going to get quite heavy in terms of what is going on here. But I wanted to show you how these particular matching criteria and also the log files work. So if you are looking at checking about exactly what it's doing, you can obviously scroll through and you can find these items here. Now they do clear out daily, and it creates a new one, so you're not going to end up with a massive log file. You can see the name here, and also doing a search inside Notepad is obviously very helpful as well. Now let's suppose we have Lewis here, and we say we're going to be rewriting this item. Now I know for a fact as well that this account does actually already exist inside the target. Now we would normally say yes, it's going to be the same person, it's got the same UPN prefix, and that's fine. Now if we make that assumption, that is okay. If that's what you want it to do, it will then match on the UPN, and it will merge that information obviously over the top of what it has in the target. But what I want to show you here is if we go into the project advanced options and hit matching criteria. Now it is explained in the documentation really how this works, but you can see here what I'm going to be looking at here is the UPN prefix. That's the one we do really want to match on for this particular one there. When I get to the second or third one we're doing here, I'm going to start talking about the employee ID. So I'll come back to that because it's the UPN prefix that I want to match on first off, just to show you how that works. I do prefer that we use these other items here like employee ID because it's more of a granular match and we can be a bit more defined with it. But for this one for Lewis, we'll choose UPN prefix. And we will then, obviously that automatically gets saved when you make that change. Go up here and we'll go back down and find him again. Where are you, Lewis? There you are. And we'll say write to target, like so. Start migration, hit OK. Now when we do that, I'm going to jump straight across to the DC, which is this guy here. And oh, look at that, 2 seconds to go. That was good timing. Excellent. But you can see here it's getting the object. It needs to do one. It's not doing Martin anymore. Remember that one because we've told it not to sync. But you can see here it hasn't gone purple to say it's created a new object. It's saying it's updated the object that it found in the target environment for Lewis, and it's put OK next to it. Now that's gone straight over the top of whatever was there. So if you didn't want that to happen, then you've got a bit of a problem. So that's why I want to show you how to do the simulation and look through these log files to make sure that your matching criteria is great. And I know I'm talking a lot about matching criteria, but it is absolutely vital you get that right in these projects. Otherwise, you will end up breaking some of these accounts in the target from no fault of your own there. So you can see Lewis. Now if I look at the target tenant, you will find there's only one Lewis in there, which I can show you here. If I do a refresh, then you can see there he is, Lewis. Now he already existed, but he's been merged with the details from the source. So that's great. But let's say we wanted to check out everything with those logs and do a simulation first to see what it would do before we just let it go nuts and do these things inside the tenant for us. So let's pick another account, and we're going to choose, I think we're going to choose Sergio for this next one. So you can see on the target that Sergio does exist here. And if I have a look at his account inside Entra, we can see that he doesn't have anything set up for things like employee ID and otherwise as well. So back to the MigrationWiz console, and I'm going to go to edit the project, the advanced options, and I'm going to go to matching criteria, and I'm going to say employee ID this time. Now we hit OK here. What I can tell you though is that the employee ID is not set on either of the source or the target accounts for Sergio. So I want to show you what it does when you say employee ID but don't have an employee ID set. So we're going to go all the way down the bottom here, and we'll find Sergio, and we will then write him to the target. So we'll say start migration, off you go. So back to the DC, we'll trigger the heartbeat again, and it will get the work that it needs to do. This time it's 2, and you can see Sergio. Now what it's done straight away is it's gone, and the update for Sergio has happened, and you'll find it has matched those accounts. Now because it couldn't find anything in the employee ID was not set on the source, employee ID is not set on the target, it's rolled back and done the UPN prefix match for Sergio because that's the only way it could possibly do the matching. Now because there was no matching of the employee IDs because they were both blank, it's taken Sergio.Perez and performed the migration that way. So we've got to make sure that if we are setting something, this is why I bring this up, if you are setting employee ID as your matching criteria, you've got to have something set on either side for employee ID for that to really take effect. Otherwise it is going to go bach to the UPN matching and perform it that way. So I've got a couple of other scenarios to talk about, and that is, I'm going to show you one account that does have an employee ID match, and also then what happens when one has an employee ID match that doesn't match on both sides. What does that do? And I want to show you the log files accordingly. So what we'll do is we're going to go and have a look at another account here, which will be for George. So let's have a look on our source side. You can see here's George Russell on the source. And if we have a look at his properties, you'll see he does have an employee ID GR63. So we're going to check him out on the target side as well. So back to users, and let's find George here and have a look at properties on the target, and you can see it's set to GR63. So what we should see is that this one will match accordingly as well, because it's matching on the employee ID rather than just the UPN name. So to make sure that match is happening, I'm going to add something else into here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the job title for George. We're going to put him, because he is one driver. There we go. And I'm going to do the same sort of thing on the source side as well. So you can see, go into here, and job title, I'm going to say like that. Now the reason I'm putting that in is because I want it to show you how it will overwrite the target with obviously the source information when it has that effective match that it's found of that employee ID. So what I've put in here, I've given him a different job title and a different company name than on the target. So we should see those pieces of information get written over the top of the target account. Now obviously in the source, I'm going to have to go here and I'm going to do another start scan and transmit just to make sure that that data is updated in the console for when it performs that write, which we can check as well. If we go into the console, we can check that out. So let's find George on this list, and there he is there. We can see that extra information that's come across, which will be ready to write onto the target. Now, before we do this, what I wanted to come back to what I was telling you about before is let's suppose we're not totally sure what's going to happen with this, and we want to check out from a simulation perspective. Go up here and turn on simulation. Like that, you can see it's gone white. The simulation is now active, which is good. So when I kick off the migration for George, which I hit here, and write to target, start that, it'll do us a test on that account and see what it's going to happen. We're then going to look through the log files to check out what is going on with George and what it will actually do, but no changes are going to get written to the target at all for George. It'll just give us the results about what it's planning to do. So we'll look at the DC, and you can see it's ready to run in a few seconds. I'll let that count down there and just start the recording again there. There we are, a few seconds to run. And there, now these should show 3 objects, correct? It's still got Lewis and Sergio there. But what it's doing here is everything's turned into a simulation now. So it's not going to start, even though we've told it previously to sync Lewis and Sergio, because we've turned simulation on, they become part of the simulation as well. But the key one there is we want to look at user object George Russell, simulated entry, check log file for results. So let's go and have a look at this log file and have a look for George and see what it looks like in there. Now, obviously it's coming right from the top. We're going to have to go right down the bottom and work our way upwards a little bit, because obviously there's 3 items in there. Sometimes you do a simulation just with 1, makes it a little bit easier to find. But I'm going to be, excuse me while I just scroll up here and look for George. It should be the next one here. There he is there. So as I look through the log file for him, you can see, obviously working through this, we've got the attribute name for the matching is employee ID, and this one for George, as you can see, and it's found that it needs to find the matching criteria GR63 and find the user based on these items here, which it has done. You can see found is true. It's found a match. And you can see there's the target object GUID that it's going to write on, and there's the source object GUID. Now, if you're doing full fidelity checks across the two, these are obviously important because these are your binding criteria in terms of what it's going to be doing. So you can see what it's done is it then takes all the other details about what it needs to sanitize and make work, and it will then write those objects into that account. You can see here it's patching user, which is its way of saying it's merging with that particular UPN. There's the mail nickname, and it goes through and does what it needs to do. So we can tell from there, if we were to go and check out these particular GUIDs, you'd find that those are matching, obviously, what it's doing with the GR63, the employee ID, and then it will write that account accordingly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off the simulation, and I'm going to then let it write that account to show you then it actually working through and actually finding that based on the match and updating that information there. So here we sit and take the simulation change off, and if we look down again, you'll find there's the George sitting here, and you can see it is awaiting write to target because technically it's the first time it's actually being run. You can see that's why it's saying awaiting first sync. So be careful, because you can just turn off that simulation change and everything you've told it to do is going to start to happen on the tenant. So obviously that's important to know. But if I go across to the DC again now and close that out and come back here, and I'm going to say trigger the manual heartbeat, you'll find it's out of simulation now, and it will grab those three objects and perform the work it needs to do. And you can see here it's updated George, and these other items are part of that continuous sync. So now let's go and have a quick look back at George in the target and just make sure it's brought over all that information and it has matched correctly. So this is the target screen. You can see I haven't refreshed yet, so I will go back to users and then hit refresh and then go and have a look at George. And we should find under properties, I'm expecting, there we go, look, there's our information, and we know that account has been matched correctly, and it's made those updates inside the target AD. So that's all very good, but what happens then if we are telling it to match on employee ID? It does have items in there, and they don't match, and therefore it will try and fall back to the creation of the new account. So what I'm going to do here is have a look at the users again, and this particular one here, Lando Norris. Now, if we look at the properties for Lando, you can see here, doesn't have an employee ID, it's blank, but he does have an employee ID on the source side. So let's go and have a look at that just to confirm. So in the source side here, we'll have a look at Lando, the Cozy Mouse account, and have a look at properties of this guy. And you can see there we are, LN04 is the employee ID. So what I'm expecting it to do is it will try and match those accounts, and it'll say, no, this doesn't match. And so what it will try and do after it says there's no match there, it's going to try and create the account. So I'm going to show you what it does when it tries to create the account when there is already technically one there, but the match is failing. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go and trigger the console. Like so, we're going to find Lando in here. There he is. And we're just going to go straight in there. We've still got employee ID set up, obviously, as our match criteria. But now we're going to say write to target for Lando. And let's see what he does, because he does not have a matching criteria for that. So there he is. And we'll hit this one here. Now, I'm not going to do a simulation on this one. I'm just going to let it go ahead and try and do it. And let's see the error that appears because of what we're doing. So there, get our OG objects, it's found 4, which is what we say there. And there we are, straight away, Lando Norris is failing. Now this is a good scenario, because what you don't want to happen, and what it's proving here, is it's saying that, hey, you know what? There's somebody called Lando already in the target tenant. You've told it to match on employee ID. Those IDs do not match, and therefore it's going to fall back and say, well, actually, okay, it doesn't match. I need to create a new object. But of course it can't, because the user principal name is going to be the same on both. So obviously it fails on the creation of the object because it's got a UPN that is already existing on that tenant. So you can see there we are. There's our failure item there. So let's have a look at the target. Just make sure there are no two Lando Norris accounts in there. So if we go back in here, there's our Lando Norris in our target, and I hit here, refresh, and there we are, look, only one Lando Norris, which is exactly right. And that Lando Norris is completely intact. in terms of, you can see there's no employee ID, nothing's been written here. That is exactly how it was previously, because as you can see, if I drop that away, it has failed. Now if I jump back into the console, we'll see that failure as well. And you can see there he is, Lando, object cannot be written. So it's also handy if you're doing a whole project like this, just do a quick search on the object can't be written, and that will give you a list of all the little failure accounts that it finds. So if you were in simulation mode, obviously you're not going to see that because it hasn't tried to write it yet. You have to look at the log files to make sure. But when it's out of simulation, it says it can't write that particular object. So what are we going to do about it? We've got a few options here. We can either say, actually, yes, it is a match, and we can then put the details in the employee ID. But let's suppose there was two people called Lando Norris. What happens in the target? Obviously, having the matching criteria is great, because what it's done is it stopped us from bulldozing over the top of the other Lando Norris account and merging the two together, which is clearly not what is meant to happen here. So that's a good situation. But obviously we do want to have Lando Norris created, but we want to create it and we want to call him Lando.Norris2 as the UPN. I mean, you can put whatever you need to in there, but we want to make it so that it is like that. So what we do is we go in here, and you can see here, it's going to take the default source object UPN as its target UPN. That's what it's going to try and write as it goes through and does this one, but obviously can't. So what I can do, I can click this little symbol here, and you can see what do I want it to be. Now these here are grayed out slightly, so you can see these aren't actually effective there, but let's put this in, and we'll put in Lando Norris 2. You can see I might have done this before. So Lando Norris 2 there, and we decide what we want those items to be, and I'm going to say I want the SAM account name, Lando Norris 2 as well, and I want the, as you can see, the mail address as well. Now let's go and save that, and that will now make that change. So next time that it tries to write, it's going to try and write it as Lando Norris 2. So let's go into our controller here, and oh, I hit the cycle. I didn't have to press it. There we go. Look at that. Writing the user Lando Norris. That was good timing, actually. But what it's done, you can see it's written a brand new object for Lando. So let's jump over and see what it looks like. So this is our target tenant. There's the original Lando, and if I hit users there, hit a refresh, there we go. Look, two of them. One is Lando Norris 2 and Lando Norris, and if we look at our main user panel and hit a refresh there, we should see two of them as well. As you can see, they are present now, and they've got two distinct UPNs, as you can see on that screen. So of course the matching has stopped us from bulldozing over the top of this Lando Norris account, which we didn't want to happen. We wanted it to be able to create Lando Norris 2 because it already existed and it wasn't a match. So I know I've spent a lot of time on the matching criteria about how this works, but it is really vital for the success of your project and your client to make sure that you do things with the matching criteria, make sure that is correct, do the simulation, have a look at the log files, see everything happening on here, but you can see those different scenarios. That's the effect that it's going to have inside your target AD. Now remember that if you have this sitting in the background, it's going to sync every 300 seconds and it's going to make updates. So if you've got the sync agent turned on the source, it's going to keep writing those objects and making those updates, overwriting what's in the target. So what you might want to do is jump back into the console once you've got the migration done, go and turn it off for those users, and so they don't continually sync like this. So coming back in here, what we can do is we can have a look at, let's say we've got written successfully and updated successfully. There's our items here, and what I might do is just go here and hit stop, and that will stop that continuous sync. But you can see in the status, sync is off, but the object status, yes, it has been updated successfully or written successfully. You can tell that it is actually there, which is obviously good. Now, and we can go back and turn that off, and then there's the rest of the objects, which you can then obviously sync to the target as needed based on, again, your matching criteria or how you've handled that. Now before I finish up, I want to show you a couple of other things here. You'll notice that once the object has been written, the target UPN then gets collected over here, and that's what it's done. Now if you were to change your matching criteria, after this has all been written and it's made that update in the target there, that is not going to take effect on that user anymore. It's already bound these two together, and it's stored the object GUID, as I was showing before with the logs, of those two items in the console database. So you could change it to anything you want, and you'll find that even if the matching then no longer exists, that matching will still work for those two objects because it's recorded that entry. So what you would need to do if you want to go and do that is remove them from the project and then get them to re-add them in from the source, and that will reset that binding, and then you can go ahead and do other things with it. Just important note there. But what I wanted to tell you about was these two here, which is lock source and transformation options. If I hit lock source, that stops and it blocks the source agent from making any changes to any of these objects. So even if it runs again, it could run 100 times, it's not going to make a single difference to that until you turn that off. The console itself on the agent is going to say you have a locked source, it can't update anything. And the other option here is that transformation setting here. So this really talks about how it is going to take this source object and what it's going to do with it in the target, because you might have a situation where you want everything to be created with like first name dot last name or first initial last name, any of these items here. And if you want to do a custom one, you can then sort of put little dots or whatever you need to do as the separators, really define what your transformation is going to be. Generally, I find we leave it as the default source object, but there will be situations where you want to change that. In terms of these projects, it does give you a bit of flexibility when it wants to create these items, obviously, in the target accounts. So that concludes what I want to show you with the Entra to Entra migration project inside MigrationWiz. Thank you for watching, and please reach out to us if you have any questions, or have a look at the help desk articles. There's a lot of information there as well. But once again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.